extortion, illegal gambling, arson, loan sharking, and labor racketeering.
Faces of the accused because they are presumed to be innocent. This week, more than 100, New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, involving 7 mob families, the 5 New York families, the Gambino, Genovese, Colombo, Bonanno, and Lucchese families, as well as the smaller New Jersey family, the Cavalcantes. They are believed to be the inspiration for The Sopranos, and in New England, as well as a slew of bookies, middle management, and other...
So here's the proof, huh? Give the story because it's better than the truth, huh? Allegories will keep between me and you, huh? We get coins, never scraps. See, this a Bitcoin getting cat. So here's the proof, huh? Give the story because it's better than the truth, huh? Allegories will keep between me and you, huh? We get coins, never scraps. See, this a Bitcoin getting cat. So join, started federal, grabbed a Colombo, see proof of work, I made it legible. Move out to cyber, was keeping crimes off of the web for you. Started a special group, yeah, I went private. Fell in love with Bitcoin and started mining. That's when I started shining. Getting green, dropping gems, rocking the comic club, got them sent. They laugh, popping limbs. Give them life, here's the boost. Gotta put in the work, here's the proof. So here's the proof, huh? Give the story because it's better than the truth, huh? Allegories will keep between me and you, huh? We get coins, never scraps. See, this a Bitcoin getting cat. So here's the proof, huh? Give the story because it's better than the truth, huh? Allegories will keep between me and you, huh? We get coins, never scraps. See, this a Bitcoin getting cat. So join, get it back.
Hello, I'm back. It's been, I don't know, maybe, I want to say a year, but it's probably been close to that. I don't know, 8 months or something like that. Let me first start off by saying I am aware that I have a sty in my eye. It's this eye. It's very painful. The swelling's gone down a little bit. So if anyone sees it on the video, I'm well aware and treating it accordingly. Hopefully it'll be gone by tomorrow. Yeah, I wanted to do a show because it's been so long, way too long. And I changed my office around and I had a lot going on. But the bottom line is it's kind of like the gym and anything else. If you get out of the habit of doing it, it just becomes harder to find the time for it. So the other thing is there's just so much going on. It's not one of those situations where there's nothing going on, nothing to talk about. It's almost like every day there's so much going on, so much to talk about. And by the time you sit down to think about, you know, what you want to say and how you want to do it, there's another news cycle that comes in with more information. I think the last show I did, or one of the last shows I did, was on the ETFs and Bitcoin. So I figured I'd start there because that was December, almost a year ago. That was a little over a year ago, December 3rd, 2023, where I did an episode on the failed lawsuits from the Biden administration's war on Bitcoin and how they had blocked the creation of the Bitcoin ETFs and had ultimately lost the lawsuit, and how there was nothing now in the way of creating Bitcoin ETFs. So Bitcoin, I think, was about 35,000 during that episode, maybe 40. And now we're sitting at 96,000 as kind of anticipated, just because of the inflows that those ETFs create. I think they're something like 50 billion in inflows alone to BlackRock, and it'll probably overtake gold's total ETFs in the next year or so. So it's been the most successful ETF launch in history. Fidelity, BlackRock, I think, have the two largest, but you still have Grayscale and a few other players in the space. So it's really helped drive the price of Bitcoin up as anticipated. And something I know we talked about in that episode was these aren't really traders. So it's the right type of people. I think retail is, you know, when retail gets involved with Bitcoin, it's frustrating because you get people trying to play the market and you get people that are buying and selling, and there's just a lot of movement. Whereas with the ETFs, the nice thing is that it creates a lot of stability. So Bitcoin has gone up, whatever, 100 and something percent since that episode. So basically 100 and something percent over the course of a year. But there haven't been any like major retraces. And I think we might see an end to a lot of the volatility as these major players enter the Bitcoin community, into the Bitcoin market. These people that are not interested in, trading, but are more interested in hodling. I think it'll help suppress some of that volatility, which I think will attract a lot of people that were maybe a little bit scared to get in. What's up, John? So where we last left off, we weren't sure. I kind of believed strongly that those ETFs would play out the way that they've been playing out. I think it's probably exceeded expectations. With that, I went to the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. When was that? I don't know how many months ago that was. Which was awesome. It's the first time I went to the annual Bitcoin conference, and Nashville's awesome, by the way, just a great city. My wife and I had a great time. That Broadway street is so cool. But got to see Trump speak live, which was pretty neat. I had some clips I think I tweeted out during the time. Seeing Trump live is definitely an experience. It felt more akin to me like watching like a little bit of an open mic comic working out some material, but also, a presidential candidate. So it was kind of funny. You could absolutely see live when he's going, through these talking points. I think there probably is a teleprompter, but then he just digresses again, almost like a comic working out material. When he made the statement about Gary Gensler was one of those moments where he talked about firing Gary Gensler, and the crowd like erupted. I think I literally jumped out of my seat, and he paused. He said, "Wow, I didn't think I'd get a reaction like that." It's like, he paused. He has some good timing, and he goes, "So I'm going to say it again," which is really funny. And then he said it again on day one, and he kind of paused. It was great timing. He goes, "On day one, I'm going to fire Gary Gensler," and everyone went fucking batshit, which I think was a big moment for him, because I know, at the end of the day, politicians, what they say, especially when they're running, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. And, I don't think Trump was sitting down reading the Bitcoin white paper and really becoming a true fan of Bitcoin. That takes time. I think he'll get there. So I'm not stupid enough to believe he fully understands the X's and O's of it. But it's important enough that he was open-minded to it. And I think being at the Bitcoin conference and seeing that crowd, which was a massive crowd, and seeing the response from the crowd on certain issues like the SEC, I think it just solidified in his mind that there is a whole group of people out there, millions and millions of people out there, who feel like they've been treated unfairly by the current administration, by the Biden administration, and that these people were more than happy to go out and vote for anyone who was going to put an end to it. And that's what was kind of cool for me over the last year, is seeing a lot of staunch libertarians that I feel like Trump probably would have not been, for a lot of different reasons, an ideal candidate for them. And as Trump embraces more libertarian principles, smaller government, bringing Rand Paul into the conversation. I almost said RuPaul. I don't think RuPaul's on his cabinet. That's the current administration. RuPaul's on the Biden administration cabinet. So I think that I think seeing that, it opened a lot of eyes, and he made a lot of fans with that. And I'm sure they went out and voted, which was pretty awesome. And him following up post-election. So that night of the election, I remember sitting there at a friend's house, and, I was skeptical if Trump was going to be able to pull it off. Of course, we all were. And I think I really started to sense that he was winning, because the price of Bitcoin, the market was telling me that they believed he was going to win, because starting earlier in that day, Bitcoin started to rise, and it was in the 70s, I think. And throughout that election night, it just kept going up and up and up. And, the understanding being that, I think Bitcoin would have went down had Kamala won, because they know it would have been another 4 years of just defiance and rejection of anything related to, Bitcoin. And conversely, if Trump won, I think everyone understood that there was going to be hopefully, some kind of change. And so it was kind of cool as the election night went on, and the number, his votes, he started winning more and more states. You started seeing the price of Bitcoin go up, which was really cool to see. And it hasn't stopped. So it was at 70 something, and it peaked at 104,000 last week, which is, just crazy, right? These are numbers that I always felt like would come, but to actually see them on your screen is a pretty awe-inspiring moment. But the fact that they're following up, Trump's son Eric was just there's a Bitcoin conference in the UAE that he just gave a really cool speech on, talking about Bitcoin very passionately about it. So at first, you kind of cautiously say, well, you don't know once he's elected what's going to really happen. But the major announcement at the Bitcoin conference by Trump was that he was going to, at a minimum, take the existing Bitcoin that the government has mostly through seizures, which is like 200,000+ Bitcoin, and convert that to a Bitcoin strategic reserve. And then Senator Lummis proposed at the end of the conference, right after Trump got off stage, proposed legislation to establish a more formal Bitcoin reserve or accumulation process to get something like 1 million Bitcoin over the next X amount of years, handful of years, 2-3 years, whatever it is, which is, just to put it in perspective, it's not $1 million, it's 1 million Bitcoin. So there's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be made. And it's estimated anywhere between 2, 3, 4 million of that is just lost forever, including Satoshi's 1 million Bitcoin. So we're really talking about 18 million Bitcoin at best, I think, in circulation that will ever be available. And the government looking to stockpile 1 million of that. And like I said earlier, these are not day traders. The government is not going to be moving Bitcoin in and out. The government stockpiles gold as a strategic reserve asset for if the shit hits the fan. And that's typically a one-way process. They take it in, it doesn't ever see the light of day again. So just imagine, percentage wise, you're taking massive percentage of Bitcoin off the market, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% of Bitcoin in chunks, putting it in a strategic reserve for the United States. And that might never see the light of day ever. Same thing goes for people like companies like MicroStrategy, Saylor, who rode Bitcoin down from 69,000 down to 15 and didn't sell a single Satoshi. So that Bitcoin is very unlikely to ever make it out again. And he's sitting on, I think it's like 500,000 Bitcoin, 500,000 Bitcoin. I think it's just an insane amount. So I guess my point with that is that, as exciting as that is for me, it scares me for like my loved ones, because I know that the window is not going to be open for much longer, where in the past, the supply shock argument is an interesting one, because Bitcoin being a finite asset, as mining production goes down on 4-year cycles, it's interesting or not crazy to think that that's going to create a supply shock, meaning there's not going to be enough. But really thinking about it is, most of the Bitcoin that's going to be produced, if there's 21 million total Bitcoin, like 20 million has already been produced, close to that. So we're pretty much 99% at stock to flow. We pretty much have 99% of the Bitcoin that's ever going to be there out there. So perception, I think, matters. I think the perception that because mining, the output decreases by half every 4 years, I think the perception of scarcity maybe is more impactful than the reality of this scarcity. But the difference between this cycle and every other cycle that I've been through, and I've been through every cycle since 2012, the difference between those cycles and this cycles is the Bitcoin. There was always going to be somebody, as price went up, to sell their Bitcoin at a certain price. You're seeing a lot of OG Bitcoin owners in this cycle selling their Bitcoin because they hit this monumental mark of 100,000, and a lot of people who've been holding since it was like $2 rationally are probably like, yes, I know this is going to continue to go up, but at a minimum, why not sell a few $1 million worth? And I don't really blame them for that, because these are people that have rode it up, in insanely long time. But the problem now is that the people who are buying that, so they go and they sell it, and then that gets swallowed up by a MicroStrategy, that gets swallowed up by the federal government, that gets swallowed up by these ETFs. It's going to get swallowed up by other nation states. Russia's talking about it. China's talking about it. 2025, we're going to see nation state adoption. Like, I'm 99% sure Trump will establish some kind of federal Bitcoin strategic reserve. Whether he takes the existing Bitcoin that's there, assuming the Biden administration doesn't auction that off out of fucking spite, which is definitely possible. But assuming they don't do that, then he's got 200,000 Bitcoin, which is not insignificant, that he can move over immediately. And then on top of that, it would be nice if he started buying, even if he made a couple of initial purchases. And then if he does that, then it's going to be a problem for Russia. It's going to be a problem for China. It's going to be a problem for India. It's going to be a problem for virtually everybody, because they're going to know that if they are wrong on this guess, and that the United States is stockpiling something and is now moving it into and considering it a reserve asset, a strategic reserve asset, that if they don't, the risk reward calculations, that is all fucked up. Like you have to buy some just in case that you're wrong, because if you don't, it's catastrophic that you're going to basically end up like, obsoleting yourself by virtue of the fact that you're not going to be able to get it because the United States is going to hoard that. And so it scares me, going back to my point, I'm rambling here, but my point is, what scares me is that the idea that you could always go into the market and buy, I think that'll always be the case, but I think it's going to be harder, i.e. the price is going to go up so high that people are going to feel priced out of being able to acquire any meaningful amount, because there's no price you're going to offer the United States government that they're going to open the vault and start selling. That's not how they work. It's not how gold has worked as a strategic reserve asset. It's definitely not going to be how Bitcoin is going to work. That's their Armageddon money. That's their war chest for the collapse of the U.S. dollar. So it's going to get harder, and it's frustrating, and because you want your people who you believe are good people to protect themselves and their families. But I don't want to say time is running out. You'll always be able to buy. You can buy $5 worth of Bitcoin. Doesn't mean you have to buy a whole Bitcoin, but just think about from where I was last year having this conversation. Let's say 35,000, which for a lot of Americans is a lot of money, but is attainable, right? They have $35,000 cars, right? They could have taken out a HELOC or a loan, bought a full Bitcoin, and paid that back in a reasonable amount of time. There's a lot fewer people at 100K, or when this thing blows back through 100K and we're ended up at 125 or 150K next year, that are going to be like, yeah, that's for most of the country, that's more than their house costs, or at least equivalent. So you're talking about them taking out a loan now that's the equivalent of another mortgage, whereas a year ago would have been the equivalent of a car. And 2 years before that would have been equivalent of a cheap car when it hit 15,000, 16,000. So the opportunity to be a whole coiner is definitely coming to an end for most. Forget outside of the United States, it's gone, right? For most of the planet outside of the first world countries, there's zero chance you're going to get to one coin if they're starting now. For first world countries, there's still a chance, but it's difficult. And, especially if you're older. If you're younger, it's good to get your kids, if they work and they have a savings, take that money if they don't need that money and just have them buy Bitcoin with it. Their waitressing money, their money from working at the supermarket, it's just sitting in a Chase account. It's pointless. It's doing nothing for them. You don't get wealth by saving money. You get wealth by investing money. And even if it continues to be volatile day to day, week to week, or even month to month, that your kid's not going to need that money for 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years. When they get out of college, get out of medical school or law school. I mean, time is the most, is the greatest asset, the greatest thing that they have on their side, that as we get older, we start to lose that advantage. We start thinking, it's crazy how you start thinking in terms of, like, when I was younger, I used to think in terms of, retirement, my 401k, it's like, that's like forever down the road. Anything could happen. But now I'm looking at it, I'm like, damn, I'm like closer to retirement than I'm not. I just turned 47. So, it's the window starts to close faster, and if you have more time, you can do a lot more with it. So that kind of makes me worried for normies, that they're going to find themselves in a similar situation, where I don't like the idea of Bitcoin getting very centralized, but a lot of this, like, you have a chance to front run the U.S. government. You have a chance to front run 99% of corporate America outside of the companies like MicroStrategy, who are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Microsoft just voted no today to add it to their balance sheet. It will go down as one of the most costly missed opportunities in Microsoft history 5 years from now, when they look back, that had they bought, $1 billion worth, you're talking about taking cash sitting on a balance sheet that's doing nothing for the company. Same thing with Apple. These companies are going to jump, and one of them is going to jump first, and then it's going to be, everyone's going to rush into the pool, because once Apple does it, once a Microsoft does it, once an Amazon does it, then again, game theory plays out just like on the nation state level, and you're not going to really have an option to, like, sit it out, because you're going to have what is an appreciating asset with zero maintenance costs working against the US dollar that's inflating at a, conservatively, 7%, 8% a year. conservatively, probably closer to 12% a year. So it's a no-brainer. Something interesting too that came up recently is that in El Salvador's president started buying 1 Bitcoin a day, like a couple of years ago now. So he's got like almost $1 billion US, equivalent of $1 billion US in Bitcoin, because he's been stacking, right from 15,000 all the way up through, which is awesome. You want to talk about simulation theory and the future and how this plays out. They were seeking an IMF loan from the World Bank, and of course, nothing comes without strings. And one of the conditions, the reason why they were potentially not going to get that loan, was because the World Bank does not like Bitcoin. It's completely antithesis of what a centralized bank wants to be. They want to control the flow of money. They want to control the production of money. They want to control ultimately what you spend it on. And Bitcoin is the complete opposite of that. So they struck an agreement just yesterday with El Salvador that which runs on the Bitcoin standard, meaning their economy runs on Bitcoin. Like, you go to the store, you use Bitcoin to purchase bananas, and that was mandatory. And they said, well, at minimum, you have to make it optional. So the stores, the economy in El Salvador can accept Bitcoin, but if someone wants to pay in their shitty fiat cash, whatever that is, they can, which is fine, because people have seen the production of Bitcoin, so that most people are not going to want to carry fiat over there, I'm guessing. But here's the cool thing. Like 2 weeks ago, they discovered like one of the largest gold deposits on their soil that I've ever heard. It's something like $1 trillion, believed to be like $1 trillion worth of gold. And this is so fascinating because, like they always say, right, the thing that people have a tough time wrapping their mind around about Bitcoin is it's truly finite. It's not scarce in my mind. Scarce means hard to find, but can be found. Gold is scarce. How much gold is in the world? Well, we know what's in the vaults. We know what people have in jewelry. And then we could just guess what's under the crust of the earth. And I'm not going to get into the Winklevoss thing about the asteroids, which is kind of silly, but let's assume that there's no gold outside any place on the planet. Even with that said, we just don't know what's beneath our feet. And what we know about gold is that it is mined in order of difficulty. The easier it is to mine gold, that gold gets mined first. If you just shoveled in your backyard and you found a nugget of gold, that's the first that gets pulled out of the ground, right? When America became, we started colonizing the country. And then as it gets deeper, you have to do an analysis which says, all right, it's 50 feet deep, let's say, and it's 1930. And you're like, what's it going to cost for me to dig up gold? And then someone does the math and says it's going to take this heavy equipment, this fuel, this man labor, blah, blah, blah. It costs, I'll make it up. It costs you $2 million to dig this gold up. And then someone's going to say, well, how much gold do we think there is? And if they say there's only $200,000 worth of gold, someone's going to say, that's probably not a great idea. But what happens if the price of gold goes up? And now suddenly gold goes up in cost, and now that chunk of gold's worth $5 million. Well, suddenly the $1 million you need to sink into that excavation becomes a no-brainer. You're going to 5x your investment on that, meaning that as demand increases for gold, production will increase. I don't care what people say. Well, what if there's no more? They will always go out and find more as price goes up, gold goes up. That's what is defective about gold, is that it's sitting at 2,000 an ounce. And I guarantee you there are people that are going, I know of a gold deposit somewhere that no one else knows about, that once it hits 5,000 an ounce, my profit margin goes into the black, and I can now afford to dig this out because I'll get X amount return on that for that risk that I'm going to take. With Bitcoin, there is no option for that. So as demand goes up, there is no way to produce more of it. So you're screwed. If you're like, oh, well, we'll just create more Bitcoin and somebody will just change the code. That's just an impossibility. That cannot happen based on how the protocol is set up. So even if Bitcoin hits $1 million a coin, there will be no easing of that by just issuing more Bitcoin. That's what the government would do. Or the government would say, oh, well, we'll just print a little bit more. That's what they do with the economy now, is when they want to start a war, they just print some money. There's no vote by Congress, and they go pay for that. And people go, well, I didn't feel a difference. But then 6 months later, a year later, when gas doubles, Now you feel the difference, and you just don't correlate it with the fact that they printed money before, and it's a ripple effect, a quintillion effect. As the money moves through the economy, it takes about a year to reach average Joes going to the supermarket. And then suddenly you're like, my dollar doesn't work as well anymore. Why is that? So what's happening in El Salvador is very interesting, because they gave them the loan, and I forget how many billions of dollars it is. And there's some speculation, and I think it would be total, another piece of evidence we're living in a simulation, for the president of El Salvador to use that money to excavate the gold, which I heard some number like it could increase the supply of gold by 17% globally, which is fucking insane. It's insane to move gold's market cap by 1% is insane. And sell the gold and buy Bitcoin, which would be the most sort of Machiavellian outcome for this country trying to pull itself out of third world status and build itself into this like mini superpower, to take the fiat currency dog shit that they're going to get from the bank, use it to mine a much better asset, which is gold, dump the gold on the market, and buy Bitcoin, which will simultaneously decrease the value of gold, which will then cause a run on gold, because people are going to see, holy shit, this guy's about to dump all this gold on the market. People are going to sell. And simultaneously, by purchasing billions and billions of dollars of Bitcoin, will continue to drive the price upward. So you want to talk about like a flywheel, the flywheel effect. If that plays out, it's like get your popcorn. I don't even know what to say about that. They'll be making movies on that, in the next 20 years if he pulls it off. So I thought that was really cool. I have a bunch of other topics I want to cover, and I want to bore people with Bitcoin stuff. So, well, the other thing I'll say is when I was in Nashville for a specific reason too, and I made reference to this, I think, during that podcast I did last year, which was, I know one of the other things that Trump promised was pardoning Ross Ulbricht, day one, which of course for that crowd in Nashville got a huge applause, which that's a separate kind of discussion. I've addressed that like a few times. So, which I couldn't care less. It doesn't keep me up at night. It's a whatever thing in the big scope of what hopefully will changing it better for America in the next 4 years. That is a nothing consideration in terms of what we're getting. Like, I had no problem voting for Trump. A few people asked me that, like, he's going to pardon somebody. You spent a year, prosecuting. So I whatever. I really don't care. But with that said, one of the things that I kind of mentioned and would always frustrate me about that was that there are other options for people when they get arrested. And, he put the government to their burden, which is totally his right to do. And the government proved its burden beyond a reasonable doubt to 12 strangers in very short order, mind you, given the overwhelming nature of the evidence. And he was convicted. That's I don't begrudge him. I didn't take it personally. But what wasn't known at the time was that a year after Ross was arrested, there was another arrest, because about 2 weeks after Ross was arrested, Silk Road 1 went down. Silk Road 1 went down immediately. 2 weeks later, Silk Road 2 went up. There was a guy named DPR2, Dread Pirate Roberts 2, who was running Silk Road 2, who I think it turned out to be, I think White was his last name. He was living in, if I remember correctly, the UK. But it very quickly during that year following the Silk Road 1 takedown, within the first year that Silk Road 2 was running, it ended up in the hands of somebody using the screen name DEFCON. And that was my case, was investigating Silk Road 2, which made sense because you have all the institutional knowledge from Silk Road 1. A lot of the major players, the vendors, the administration had migrated over to Silk Road 2 when it started. And that included an undercover who was working on Silk Road 1, who we thought would have absolutely been kind of outed by deduction, but was not. So there was somebody that, an agent from the Department of Homeland Security, who had arrested someone who was an employee of Silk Road 1, took over their account, right? Because these are just online accounts and no one knows what anyone looks like. and successfully adopted that person's legend, as we call it, their background, their history, and was running the was an employee of the site for like a year. And then when Silk Road 1 went down, they came over to Silk Road 2, and they were very trusted because they were like an OG now. It was like somebody who was, there for the first one is now there for the second one. And so he continued to do his undercover work, did a really good job with it. And we arrested the person running Silk Road 2, who was DEF CON in San Francisco. I went out to San Francisco almost like a year to the day of when Ross was arrested, and we arrested DEF CON, who was running Silk Road 2 now as the administrator, who lived like only a few miles from where Ross lived. So kind of funny that both people were from San Francisco. Both were from Texas originally. So there's a lot of like weird Matrix like connections between the two people. But the difference is that when we arrested the guy running Silk Road 2, whose name was Blake Benthal, he was I think a SpaceX employee at the time, or had just left SpaceX or got fired from SpaceX, in part because of this complete distraction of running the Silk Road 2 website. But we arrested him as he was pulling out of his house in a Tesla that he had bought with Bitcoin that he had obtained from the site. So we arrested him and his girlfriend as they were pulling out of the Tesla, because we had information they were headed to Las Vegas. And I was in like a bureau issued minivan, and I didn't want to get into a high speed chase with a Model S and get smoked. So we arrested him, and he cooperated, is long and short of it. And so he basically took the opposite route that Ross took. Ross was like, "You'll never prove it, and I'm going to put you to your burden," which is his right, as I said, but was not interested. And because of his non-interest, the government was not interested. So it was like, hey, we're not going to beg you to do what makes sense. Had he come forward and offered to cooperate, you never know what could have been worked out. There are some rumors that he was given like an offer of 10 years. That never happened. There was never an offer given by Southern District. So he cooperated. So which meant we had a guy now that we transported back to New York. We arrested him there. He was processed in California, and then he fell off the face of the earth. Like the newspapers had some articles on him, and then they were like, "Where's Blake?" Like kind of like pulled a Hunter Biden and just disappeared on everybody. And nobody really knew what happened. But what happened was he was cooperating, and I was handling him back in New York. So he got transported back to New York, and without getting into details, this is a brilliant guy who, again, is very typical of a lot of people who get into this space, which is that the reality of what they're doing gets lost in the fact that it's all happening through a computer screen. And so you're not really seeing the impact, good, bad, or otherwise, and it becomes very surreal. And so there's dissonance between what you're doing and the impact of it until you're arrested. And then you're like, holy shit, yeah, this kind of got out of control. And so through that cooperation over the next year, there's a cool story behind it. The New York Times did an article, if you want to look it up, and they interviewed a bunch of people involved, including myself. And the story is just interesting. It's kind of like a Catch Me If You Can, but real. I say that all the time because the Frank Abagnale story of Catch Me If You Can is 99% bullshit. Like he didn't do 99% of the things. That his biggest scam was convincing people he was a scam artist or that successful as a scam artist. He was never a doctor, never a lawyer, never did any of that shit. Never was on any of these flights. But whatever, the story's good. Well, this is kind of interesting because he actually did a lot of really cool stuff. Really, really cool stuff. And so I left the bureau like a year later to go return to private sector, and he continued to do that for like another 9 years. But we always kind of kept in touch. So the reason I was out in Nashville was because he was officially done with his cooperation. He was officially done with kind of his debt to society, and gave up 10 years of his life. Right? You think like it's not like in the movies where you cooperate and you're out gambling the next night with prostitutes and you get all your money back. It's not like that at all. It's actually basically putting your life on hold for that entire duration. It's very difficult to move on. You can't get a job. You can't it's like you disappeared off the planet for 10 years and suddenly you reemerge. So with that said, we were out in Nashville doing a conference together at a private location just outside the Bitcoin, where the Bitcoin conference was being held, to discuss that whole case and how that all happened. And the details of it. And honestly, my position is to get him. I think people do deserve a second chance, especially if they've come full circle on what they've done, and the good, bad, and ugly, acknowledge it. And it's something that I think it's a waste to have a lot of these people die in prison for no reason when they can contribute to society. And so it's my way of helping him, get back on his feet and hopefully do something, positive with the rest of his life. Because this is a super smart guy that I saw what he did at the government. I saw the tools he built. That's why I laugh about all what's happening with the FBI and the inefficiencies in the government and all that. And the big get for me in that situation was I was able to bring in somebody that I could never get a computer scientist at that level through the bureau hiring process, because there would be some ridiculous mandate put on at the last second that, oh, he's not this, he doesn't check that box. And there was just no way. And obviously money wise to offer him that. So, it was a cool experiment for me to see, okay, well, I had this opportunity to bring somebody on board that I would not be able to get otherwise because of the inefficiencies baked into the hiring process at the FBI. They'd rather bring on a computer scientist that says they know how to, they're fucking know how to code in Python, and it has no value, let's say, to us. And it's something for some reason that's on some sheet because somebody owes somebody a favor about some nonsense. And now that's the only people we can hire. So it was cool because we were able to get him, and I would bring him into the office every day. And he had, went from we used to work in the car where we brought the laptops, and then I started bringing him to a mall in Queens. So we go to the food court and we'd pop on a MiFi hotspot, and I give him his MacBook, and we'd work from there. And then eventually I got him a little nook in the office, and then I got him kind of an office where we'd lock him in, and he would work from there. And then we built a lab, and I got him into the lab, and it was just cool. It was a really cool experience with a much more positive, outcome as compared to Ross, although Ross might be pardoned, so who the hell knows. Still took about the same amount of time. But so that's why I was there. And so that was pretty neat. So moving on to other things that I've been asked about, which is like the Daniel Penny trial. What can I say? I mean, I could add somebody in here. Let me see. You want to join? I can add a lawyer friend of mine. So it was very interesting to see what was going to happen with the Daniel Penny trial, because I think we all felt that after the election, it was for the people who voted for him. I think we felt like it was a affirmation of what we felt was happening to the country, which we were just heading in the wrong direction. And the woke politics and, a lot of it's even coming back now about people being debanked, which again is a fundamental principle behind Bitcoin, which is, the idea that the government was actively debanking people who were involved in Bitcoin, debanking people for political beliefs. More that's going to come out over the next couple of years. It's horrendous. It's so horrendous. But I think we felt like with the election, it was kind of like finally, some sanity is going to return. And then the Daniel Penny trial was coming up, where it was like, so it's a New York City jury. What are the odds that they actually listen to the evidence? And surprisingly, he was acquitted. And if you guys remember, it wasn't right out of the gate. It was first, they could not agree. They were a hung jury on the first count, which was the manslaughter count, which I think carried like the 12-year plus sentence. And then it was like criminally negligent homicide and some lower counts. And what came out at trial was that, the guy came on to onto the train, and he was threatening to basically kill everybody, and was saying, I don't care if I go back to jail, I'll kill all of you. And he crept up behind him and put him in a chokehold. And then another rider, who was a black passenger, jumped on him, and they subdued him. But what was kind of interesting about what the testimony revealed was that he was breathing at the time that the paramedics showed up, which means he wasn't dead. and that the paramedics, or the cops rather, were concerned about providing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because of fear of things like hepatitis and HIV, which again is totally valid. You're not going to, you shouldn't have to go get HIV or hepatitis because you're going to give somebody on a subway car that was just threatening to kill everybody CPR. But with that said, if they did, or they had some equipment where they don't have to actually, transfer fluids, it's possible he could have been, resuscitated. And of course, the typical background, tons of drugs in his system that, of course, are contributing factors to all that. So that stuff came out at trial that not a lot of people knew. The fact that they had cooperated, the black passenger who also helped subdue the victim, if you want to call him that, is also kind of fucked up, because this guy was probably scared out of his mind that the government was going to prosecute him if he didn't cooperate. And I know how that kind of conversation goes, which is, you're a witness or you're a suspect, and you get to decide today. And if you decide that you don't want to cooperate, well, then maybe, we're going to charge you. And it's kind of fucked up, because I don't think this guy who helped for a second thought that Daniel Penny, I think he testified that like he held him too long or whatever, which is like, his opinion on that is kind of useless. Like, he's not a cop. He's not a doctor. Like, what is too long? What is his expertise in understanding how long to hold somebody and what the right way to hold them is, or whatever. It was nonsense, especially since he participated in it. But I have a feeling he'll come out now that the trial's done and do interviews and basically say I was coerced and, I was scared out of my mind, which I do believe him, that like this, like, you don't want to go be the guy to say, no, he did something right. And your family is like, just say what they want you to say, because then you could walk out of this. So, when the initial hung jury came back on the manslaughter charge, what was, kind of interesting for me from a lawyer perspective is, like, normally you have to go through the charges. The jury has to deliberate in the order of the charges. So you don't get to the lower counts until you move through the top counts. You start at the top and you move your way through. And if you get stuck, that's basically at the end of the line. It's like a board game. And so the fact that they got stuck on manslaughter, and then the prosecutors were able to dismiss those charges and move on to the lower counts. If he was convicted, I was going to be very interested to see how that would play out on appeal, because I just don't get that. I don't understand that, because if you work out of what's called a jury charge before the trial ends, so that you both, prosecution and defense, are in agreement with what the jury is going to be told about the charges, and then you could base your case strategy knowing that you're going to try to, as a defense attorney, poke holes in what ultimately is going to be the jury charge. So the jury's given like a roadmap, and that roadmap helps guide your building your case on both sides. So you know that you can make sure you can prove all that, everything in the roadmap. Otherwise, you're going to lose the case, depending on which side you're on. And so if you're building a case around defending yourself against manslaughter, it was confusing to me that you can just say, well, remove that count. Now they're on to criminally negligent homicide. Whereas you might have, if that was the top count, criminally negligent homicide, certainly as a defense attorney, I would have structured my defense in a different way that accounted for what a person might think about criminally negligent homicide. Because with the manslaughter charge, I'm more focused on that. That's the big one you want to get off the table, because the difference between the time he would serve was like night and day. It was like 12 years to like probation. I mean, it was nothing. But it didn't matter in the end, because then they got to those lower counts, and not only did they not hang on those counts, but they acquitted. So it was a real vindication. And I said this, and I've said this, and before, which is the problem with what the New York did in that situation is that they're telling people like me and other people that if you are in the city and someone needs your help, stay the fuck out of it. Let them get stabbed, shot, killed, beat up, because if you do go in and help and they decide that you're the wrong color of skin and they're the right color of skin, or some combination of that you're going to be prosecuted and potentially spend 20 years in prison for helping a train of people. Well, let's be honest, out of everyone on that train, he was the most capable of defending himself one-on-one. He was defending everyone else on that train from that guy who was probably more capable of hurting them than they were of hurting him specifically. So it's a very selfless thing to go and say, well, I could just stand in the back of the train and know that I'll wait for the next stop. He could stab and shoot somebody. I'll just put my hands up. If he comes at me, I could defend myself, and I'll let that old lady deal with him. Right. And that's the message they were basically sending, which is that anyone who's in the city who sees something going down, just pretend you didn't see it. And I had a situation a few years back where when I was still wearing a suit. I wasn't an FBI agent, but I was carrying, and I was working in the city, and I was going to the city, and some guy was in one of the elevators by the E train on the ground floor with his arm up against the neck of what it looked like his girlfriend. They were about the same age, choking the shit out of her as everybody just walked by and pretended like it wasn't happening. And so I walked up to the elevator booth, which was open, the elevator door, and I yelled at him to knock it the fuck off. And, I think he was kind of confused as to why a random looking guy would even get involved, honestly, in a suit of all things. Right. And I told him to knock it the fuck off. So he hit the close button and the door closed and he went up, and that's the train I was taking. So I went up to the train and I waited on the outside, not like right at the door, but I waited like 5 feet off of the front door. When it opened, I was there and I was like, knock it the fuck off, or I'm calling the cops. And he was like, what the fuck are you going to do about it? And then the girl was like, kind of like slinked away and went on the side. And then he fucking went over and he was like sitting next to her. It's just a real awkward kind of confrontation. And I bring that up because I would have hoped that if it had gotten violent, that, the law would have prevailed and it would have said, hey, if you're choking someone in public, we have certain societal norms which dictate that we should encourage people to intervene for those that are weak, those that are infirm, those that are old, that cannot defend themselves. And we should encourage people to intervene. And instead, what has happened is this whole idea of toxic masculinity, or whatever we want to call it, and this wokeness has eroded that concept to the point where it's now risky for you to get involved because you can end up getting charged like he did, which is really disturbing. It's not a state that I want to live in. Frankly, it's one of those things where you're like, am I going to be in New York forever? And those type of things make me go, no. So it was really nice to see that there was a acquittal on that, because it's not a celebration of a murder. It's a celebration of a social contract we should all have with each other, which is the strong defend the weak, the young defend the old. That should be how that works in society. And if you're going to fuck with somebody who's weak, there might be someone who's strong, who's willing to defend them. And even at the risk of their own personal safety. But if you're going to prosecute those people, I could tell you people like me and many others who have said, just look the other way. Look the other way. Some old lady's going to get her skull crushed in. Well, that's the luck of the draw, which is a really shitty society. It's not a society I want to live in. And that's why people leave this state and move to other states where there is a sense of community and a sense of looking out for one another. So while it is sad that anybody, ends up dead like this, this wasn't a guy, as AOC and others said, who was just on the train, or as his family said, he was a guy who asked for food and then he was killed. That's not the order of how that happened. He might have asked for food when he first came in. Who knows? Point is, he very quickly moved from asking for food to threatening to kill people, and not in the normal "I'll kill you" that we all in New York are used to hearing when someone cuts you off. It's the "I'll go back to jail" part that is probably most frightening. I don't give a fuck about jail. I'll go back to jail. This guy was arrested something like 40 something times, and some of them were like serious crimes. Like he punched a 67-year-old woman in the face, fracturing her orbital socket, which is incredibly painful. I think he like kidnapped a 7-year-old or some shit. So, not a guy who was just having a bad day, a guy with at best mental illness and drug addiction, which is the other thing that this whole thing highlights, which is that we talk about homelessness as this like, movie version of a guy who lost his job at IBM and, just needs to get back on his feet. And I really do wish it was like that. I think most of us have a lot of empathy. Americans, I think, do have a lot of empathy. But as you get older and you interact with the homeless, what you realize is, and this is something I tell my kids, and I think everyone should tell their kids, is don't be afraid to say, look, it's very sad when someone ends up on the street, but there's a common theme that's going to run through 99% of the homeless out there, which is substance abuse, and violence and incarceration, and the substance abuse, getting addicted to drugs, and going down that road is like the first step to ending up like, you don't end up homeless from one bad decision. You end up homeless from a series of bad decisions, like hundreds of bad decisions that start when you're really, really young. So him being homeless isn't because if you gave him a house tomorrow, that's all he would need. He's got mental illness. We no longer have institutions anymore, which if you live on Long Island, you know that there's a Pilgrim Psych Center, which was at one point, Google it. It's a fascinating story behind it. It was the largest mental institution in the country for many years. And we no longer have institutions like that. And those people are now put on the street, and then civilians are left to deal with them. First, the cops were left to deal with them. Now the cops don't want to deal with it because they get in trouble. So now the civilians are left to walk around and interact with people that are mentally unstable, that are on drugs, and be told that if we don't handle it the right way, we can get arrested and go to jail for the rest of our lives. I mean, how unfair is that? Right? I don't want to be exposed to that. I'm not a PhD. If I'm just a regular person with no law enforcement training, I'm not armed. I'm not physically equipped to deal with that. So, it's totally unfair to fail as a government to provide protection around this and expose civilians to it and expect them to be able to pick the right outcome. What's up, buddy? Headed to bed? I'd love to play Mario Kart, but it's kind of late. All right, go do your bedtime routine. We'll try to put something together. So that was a big deal. I think that acquittal, maybe there's some sane people left in New York City, and I hope the DA there is held accountable. And honestly, between the prosecutions of Trump, and the wasted resources of that fucking nonsense, and this case, I'd like to say I hope they realize that this city needs to go in a different direction. You do have the Mayor Adams, suddenly he's on board. He's on Team Trump. Oh, cool. My lawyer friend's going to join. All right. Let me see here. So I don't know if anyone's been following. I mean, if I didn't live in New York, I probably wouldn't give a shit about New York shit. Copy. Here we go. I'm going to drop this to him. 1 second. Craig, check your email. So the mayor has done a 180, and this all happened, I think, because he at one point came out against the failed illegal immigration policy of the current administration. And at first, came out very publicly and said, this is like really bad for New York City. I think this was after he had announced that New York City would remain a sanctuary city, which his epic virtue signaling was part of that problem, which is it's easy to write that check when it's not going to be cashed. And then the Biden administration cashed it and started flooding the country, and then Texas and other border states started shipping them to New York City. So every time I go into the city, you'd start to see these like groups of illegal immigrants around these hotels and stuff. It was just bizarre. It was like fucking third world country shit where you're like, they're just milling about and you know exactly what's going on there. And so, of course, it was like this monumental drain on New York City resources. So he then was, after saying that, was indicted. I don't know the details of the corruption. I'm not saying he was or was not corrupt. Craig Handler, everybody. What's up, buddy?
Long time no see.
I can't hear you, so you fix your mic if you can hear me. So Eric Adams now has basically come out and said, after getting indicted, had realized he's no longer afforded protection.
Can you hear me now?
Nope, still can't hear you. He's no longer afforded any protection from the current administration. He was thrown under the bus. And I think he was at a UFC fight with Trump, and like there was a video of him going over, shaking Trump's hand, and bending the knee, kind of thing, whatever. But it's very interesting because he's now come out against a lot of these woke policies. I honestly think it's part of the reason why there were no riots or anything in the city last night, is that I think he, knowing that there's a change in what people expect, that in the past law enforcement was told to look the other way while these mobs of people started forming in the city. And now they're actually able to go out there and snuff these things out before they get ultraviolet, which I'm not saying, by the way, protesting and all that, First Amendment protected activity, I'm all for that. But the minute it starts turning fiery, but mostly peaceful, before it gets to the fiery part, there needs to be arrests and there needs to be people locked up, because that is not protected. That is not First Amendment protected activity. So he's kind of fully on board now with, it seems like, the Trump agenda, probably hoping for a pardon, sadly, probably knowing that the Democrats have turned their back on him, and now his last chance is to get a pardon from Trump. What's up, Craig?
Better? Still can't hear me?
You could just read your lips. You got to go to the settings section in there and switch your microphone. So that's my thoughts on the Daniel Penny trial, which is pretty awesome. What's next on what I wanted to talk about? Oh, ChatGPT, which I actually talked to Craig about a few weeks ago. I can't hear you. I don't know if it's maybe I have to unmute you. No, mute the mic. Unmuted.
I'm not muted.
It
says it's
edit
working.
Mic settings. I can edit your mic settings. No, reduce mic background. Automatically adjust. No. And you could usually test. Oh, you can. It says, they say we can hear him. So someone said in the chat, we can hear him. Why can't I hear you? That would seem. Is it? Oh, wait, hang on a second. Oh, man. I'm going to embarrass myself there. Go ahead, Craig. How you doing?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's totally on me. That's 100% on me.
Well, it's like everything else. I get a message from you at
yes
8:45. Hey, you want to do a podcast?
I know exactly. And my speaker shut off, so that's why. Someone wrote, get Kumi to start BTC mining farm in his backyard. I know he's in South Carolina now. He could, and I'm sure the electricity there is a lot cheaper. But he did get back on the Bitcoin horse, so I was happy. I spoke to him post surgery, and he informed me the other day that he did go back in on it after losing, I think, like 3 Bitcoin on his iPhone. It will go down as the most expensive iPhone in history at some point. It'll be like the pizza, except for the iPhone. But welcome, Craig. I talked about Bitcoin for a while, so I spared you the horrors of having to listen to what's going on about that. I just talked about the Daniel Penny. Why do I keep thinking Perry?
Oh yeah.
Trial. I know we talked about that a little bit. What was your take, like, during the trial and now that we have an acquittal?
Well, I mean, it was a travesty from the get-go. I mean, the damage is already done, regardless of the outcome, regardless of the verdict and the acquittal. I mean, even the prosecution is going to have long-term effects on how New Yorkers treat each other and react to, self-defense situations and helping people who need help.
You think that, though, you're saying the damage is done, though? I mean, with the acquittal, does it swing a little bit the other direction where people like, all right,
well, the acquittal helps, but with the clear agenda of the district attorney, it's not going to stop them from, pursuing further prosecutions in situations like this, based on a political ideology, So, speaking personally, if I'm on a subway and God forbid I'm in a situation like this where under most normal circumstances I would be inclined to render assistance or help, I'm going to have to think twice.
Yeah, I think the only thing that could fix that, to your point, is if the prosecutor came out and did a mea culpa and said, yeah, we probably shouldn't have done this, but what are the odds of that
Alvin
happening?
Bragg will never do
Yeah.
that. And
No.
if you look into the background of the assistant district attorney who was the actual prosecutor on this case, she will never do that either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess you're right on that. You know, the acquittal is nice to know, but the fact that this guy had to spend all this time, like, who wants to be the next person to have to fight something for a year and hope that
Well,
you don't end up convicted?
And the reality is his fight over? I mean, he's got to look over his shoulder.
Civil
now.
suit.
Well,
Yep.
that the father has already done that. And he's got to look over his shoulder for the rest of his life. There were representatives of BLM outside the courthouse encouraging people to take the law into their own hands.
Yeah, that was crazy.
I mean, it's crazy.
Like, and not in like a roundabout way, but in a pretty direct way. It was like there's no subtlety to it. It was like, what do we need to do? Burn stuff down? And you're like, hey-o, like, what about what about all that insurrection talk? Now suddenly that's not inciting violence of any kind.
No, he basically encouraged black people to become vigilantes.
Yeah.
And attack white people.
Yeah.
That's a pretty much in those words what he said on the
He said, what if we do the
steps.
same? Yeah. What if we go out and do the same?
So, scary stuff. And, Penny's life, I don't think it's going to take a long time for there to be any sense of normalcy there. And for what? For doing the right thing. I mean, he helped minorities on the train too.
Yeah, and one of the key witnesses was a black woman that, said as much. Like, it wasn't like, he was only defending himself. The weird part about him, he's a very distinctive looking dude.
Yeah.
And it's like, if he looked like me and it was more generic looking, people might not, but I mean, that guy looks like a caricature of like I don't know what. He's just a tall dude with like kind of puffy hair and a skinny face.
Puffy blonde hair.
Yeah, like he's just going to stick out in New York. So you wonder if he's going to just have to leave New York altogether. He's a Long Island guy, isn't he?
I don't know what his background is other than he's a former Marine. That's the only thing.
Yeah, let me see. Where does Daniel Penny? I think he was Long Island. Oh yeah, Babylon. Oh no, wait.
Yeah.
Wait.
The other points I'll make on this, I don't know how long you were talking about it before I joined, but the other points are, one, the family, it's tragic that the guy's dead, I mean, that's a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an avoidable tragedy, and it was avoidable before he got on the subway that day and threatened the lives of innocent, passengers. Where was his family? Where was the system before that day? The system that let him be homeless. The system I heard you mentioning Pilgrim Psychiatric Center, and this guy had like 42 prior arrests and had been homeless for many years. And, where was his family that cares so much now? Now that there's something potentially to be gained from the tragic.
Yeah, the civil suit now, all of a sudden, all the parasites come out and it's like, show me the money. And they know with a criminal decision, a criminal verdict, a civil suit becomes infinitely easier. It's like your ace up your sleeve because the standard of proof is so high at a criminal trial. You're like, hey, criminal beyond a reasonable doubt. All we need to do is preponderance of the evidence and, just sort of equate the elements of a wrongful death suit and say, look, we proved all this. Now I don't want to say it's much harder because it's still an easier burden, but they don't have that ace up the sleeve. And someone was asking me this, and maybe you can answer this. I wasn't really sure of that. I think I know the answer, but for an estate to sue, there's no standard of like proving. So if you disown your kid, and by all accounts, it sounds like he had no relationship with his son, and then you come back in a wrongful death suit, in terms of standing, There's nothing to establish. Like, how could you sue for all these things as the estate when you had zero relationship?
Well, I think there's standing if you are the executor of the estate or the administrator of the estate from a purely procedural
We know
standpoint.
he's not. Yeah, the dad's not, right? There's no way that this guy had an estate and had an executor.
Well,
right?
the estate, when I say estate,
Yeah.
I don't necessarily mean an estate with assets. An
Yeah.
estate would simply be a legal construct of, creating
like creating an estate post,
an estate that
right.
would be capable of filing a lawsuit, a wrongful death suit, or whatever, the particular causes of action would be. His dependents or his parents, they could assert derivative claims,
Mhm.
but they would be weak. They would be weak because, like you said, there's no history of a relationship there. There's no history of support
Right.
there in any sense,
capacity,
really emotional,
in the tangible and non-tangible, right?
Exactly.
Like one is, hey, if you're a kid of somebody, or it's your son and they're supporting you financially, you can calculate that and say, this is what this person was providing me. So that doesn't exist because he was homeless.
Right.
And then on top of that, when you have things like you said, supporting, the loss of, I don't think it's still called this, but remember, for marriage,
Loss of
consortium.
Yeah.
Consortium, is that what it is?
Yeah,
Consortium.
yes.
Yeah. It was this nice way of saying not being able to have sex with your spouse.
Right.
You can sue for that, which I always laughed as a married person.
Yeah.
Like, what value would you put on that after 20 years of marriage? It's like $6. You're like, all right, so you would have gotten laid 4 more times before she died. Had she gone to 98? You're like, yes, I want to recoup the damages for that goofy blowjob.
Back in the early days of my career, I did insurance defense, and I did a lot of these construction site accidents where I was representing property owners and general contractors. And when a worker was injured, there was always that that derivative. It's called a
derivative, right?
A derivative suit by the wife or the spouse or the partner, whomever. So those claims can exist. I don't think standing would really be a defense, but certainly the facts would make the claim, would make it
from a damages perspective. So maybe you'd have standing just by being biologically connected.
Correct.
To the victim. But like from a damages perspective, like how do you calculate that, this person was not, anything to you? I find it disturbing, and maybe someone, was like, oh, well, it's a parent's love. And maybe I'm just jaded as I get older, but it's like, I just see it as parasitic. I see it as somebody who's opportunistic, who sees that this person that by all accounts just didn't have a relationship with, that even if he still loves them as a parent might, just the shame factor of coming out only when they died would prevent me from going on the news and having a press conference and wanting to I wouldn't want to handle those questions of, wait a minute, so what did you do to get him help and get him off the street so that he didn't end up on a train threatening to murder a bunch of people? But, again, this loops into the failing of legacy media. Nobody wants to ask those questions out of fear of offending somebody. And those are the questions that rational people would ask immediately. Where were you when? But the news doesn't want to do the actual investigative work and doesn't want to ask tough questions. Even you could ask that in a polite way. So I'm hoping the court does. I'm hoping that if the father does sue, that the court then says, okay, we establish you maybe have standing as a biological father. Now let's talk about your lack of relationship and your lack of any real damages, and awards them nothing.
But keep in mind, that's going to be up to the jury.
Yeah. Which in New York is like the dreamboat jury for anybody.
Well, yeah, and they could theoretically, I don't know where they reside. They could reside in Brooklyn or the Bronx or wherever.
Yeah, any of the boroughs.
Those are very pro-plaintiff, jurisdictions. So,
when I did some insurance defense work before I went to the FBI, and we handled matters that were out of New York State, New York City boroughs, right, as opposed to Suffolk County or Nassau County. They were much more conservative on everything, dollar amounts, liability. Yeah. So it's like, you knew that if you had a case, the same case that was out of Brooklyn, was like, but out of Suffolk, you're like, it's not so bad. We're not going to get from the defense, from the defense perspective.
Yeah, I would be interested to know what was the name of that kid in Wisconsin that used the AR in self-defense, and he was also acquitted.
Oh, Kyle
Rittenhouse.
Rittenhouse, yeah.
I'd be interested to know what's going on in his life now.
Yeah, I followed it a little bit. He's kind of a little bit all over the place.
He was going to become, I think he said he wanted to actually go to law school.
Yeah.
Become a lawyer. But I mean, just now that it's been years since the trial and all the media frenzy behind it, I wonder if his life has gone back to normalcy. Does he get recognized when he's out in public? Does he have to be careful about where he goes and who he goes with? Because I think that would be instructive for Daniel Penny.
Yeah, it says he remained in the spotlight, attending numerous events hosted by conservative organizations and officials, including Trump, Tucker Carlson, Matt Gaetz. Rittenhouse is currently the outreach director for Texas Gun Rights, a state affiliate of the National Association for Gun Rights Advocacy Groups. What happened? Kenosha. Yeah. So I've seen him on like random things that are on X, every once in a while he pops up, but yeah, I mean, you either lean into the fame or you go the other route.
You just fade away.
Like what happened to Derek?
Chauvin?
The Michael Brown one. Who's the cop that was acquitted on the Michael Brown one?
I don't even remember the cop's name.
Yeah, hold on.
That was the I Can't Breathe guy. Who started that, right?
Yep.
You heard him. Speaking of Derek Chauvin, you heard about what happened to him in jail.
He
was stabbed.
Was he?
Yeah, he was moved into
Darren Wilson.
What was the cop's name?
Darren Wilson was the cop from the Michael Brown thing, and he was acquitted, and he disappeared off the face of the earth. He could have kept his job, but he left it. Obviously, you can't be. What police department's going to hire you?
Yeah.
Anytime someone sees you, if you God forbid anything,
it's a liability.
Yeah, it's a liability for them. So, and that was investigated by the FBI as well, which was kind of and found nothing. The FBI investigated for like a year for potential civil rights violation, and the only thing the FBI came back with was extensive amounts of evidence confirming his account of what occurred from witnesses who were of all races, who were there at that intersection, on that street, who said, 100% that he charged the officer and was shot. And then the physical evidence that the FBI uncovered and did analysis of showed that there was Michael Brown's DNA on the pistol, that there was blood in the car. I think because what had happened was he reached in, was struggling for the weapon. I think it discharged, maybe hit one of them, and there was blood or something in the car, indicating that the person was in the car struggling for the gun. And that, and this is when I lost all faith in Michael Baden. Not that I had it anymore, but I grew up loving Dr. Baden and all that. He was kind of my generation for Forensic Files and all that shit. But he was hired by the Brown family. But the autopsy report showed that all the shots in Michael Brown were consistent with head down lunging. So it's top of the head and stuff like that. And Michael Baden had some ridiculous explanation for that. Well, that was because his hands were up and he was like this. Yeah, that makes no sense. And that was very impactful. I know at the trial, it played a big role in his acquittal, was that the eyewitness testimony and the forensics confirmed that his version. And it was, if you think about it, it's one of the last. I mean, I don't want to say the last. I'm sure there were some less celebrated cases, but that was one of the last cases that did not have a body camera. And lo and behold, now that was one of the last ones where police department said, "Fuck this, we need to wear body cameras," which have saved so many fake, I Can't Breathe, shootings that have shown. And you notice the police department, with the quickness now, police departments around the country are getting this video out So the minute it starts rumbling, and it's like, oh, he was carrying a Bible. There was one like a year after that, and the guy was supposedly carrying a Bible or some insane thing. And it was like, no, it was a handgun. And here it is on video pointed right at the cops.
Yeah.
Body camera.
Well,
And
the body
you gotta
cams
shut it down fast.
the body cams are good because they swing both ways. You know,
Yes.
I mean, they not only have they, you know, not only have they helped the police departments and the police officers who are accused of brutality or of, you know, violating civil rights, but they've also proven in some
100%.
cases that they have engaged in brutality and by violation of civil rights. So
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
I watched just as many videos, not just as many, because odds are 9 out of 10 times it's a good shooting, it's a good arrest, honestly, because you're talking about millions of arrests. People don't realize that. So you're only seeing videos from sort of when it goes bad. It's like, oh my
when
God.
the shit hits the fan.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
you know, millions of people are arrested. But point is, the ones where there's dirty cops, where they're planting drugs, stealing stuff, it's fantastic to know that that body camera video exists. Or when they're just acting inappropriately for people exercising their rights.
Right.
And cops rolling up and saying, you know, you can't record here, or, you know, the First Amendment auditors I love.
Yeah.
You know, and so
They're a pain in the ass.
they are a pain, but like the fact of the matter is, like, it's glad that stuff. There was one video that I was gonna one arrest that I was gonna do a video on, this mother-daughter who pulled up to a Starbucks to, I think, rest. It's like early morning or something. They were gonna get coffee and they were just hanging out in there. And this cop pulls up and he's just bullshit from the start. It's like, oh, you know, just want to check if everything's okay. Yeah, everything's fine. I think, you know, typical, like, we've had some break-ins in the area and some robberies. And I don't have to fucking tell you, like, we're just hanging out. And the cop just escalates it, starts asking for ID, which you can't do. Like, there's no woman's pulled over. There's no register. Was a lack of registration. No suspected of a crime.
Yeah.
And she ends up in handcuffs, and she sued and won like a ton of money. And I was like, good for her. I was like, you know, because the cops need to also understand that, like, the days of doing that shit are over, and you're there to enforce the law, and you're not there to just go on an ego fucking trip and bother some people sitting, you know, at a Starbucks drinking their coffee in the morning or whatever it was. So yeah, it's I think it's done a lot, but man, is it really done more on the side of putting down these fake even the Daniel Penny thing was on video. I mean, you can't get away with saying this stuff anymore. This bullshit, you know, Jesse Smollett bullshit of this happened and it's not on video. That's red flag number one. Where's the video of it? If someone didn't tape it from their camera, from their phone in their pocket, and it's not on street cameras, like, that's red flag one, because there are people that go out of their way to try to commit crimes, not getting caught on tape and fail. You doing something that you claim happens that wasn't caught on video in 2024 is like, you must be the most unlucky person in the world, because I can't leave my house and probably, you know, go get caught on 20 cameras driving from here to the nearest street corner. Literally, I might be on 20 different cameras, Ring doorbells, pole cameras, helicopters in the sky, drones. I mean, so it's like, it's gone from an odd thing to be caught on tape to, like, if someone tells me something happened, it's not on video right out of the gate, I'm like, well, you need to unpack that for me, because where were you that this was not, this was happening? And when these people say something, someone said something, I'm like, so nobody in the crowd picked up their phone when someone started yelling something? Like, you know, that doesn't make any sense. You know, WNBA or whatever it was. Oh, people are yelling racial shit from the crowd. Nobody recorded that. Yeah. Nobody's got their phone when someone in front of them is some bigot is going off, and nobody's like recording that. It's just impossible now. It's not possible.
Right. For better or for worse.
Yeah, for better or for worse. Exactly. It's good if you really didn't do anything wrong, and if Daniel Penny didn't have that video and now someone had to describe it, what happened, just like the Michael Brown thing, it could be really bad for you, because they could say all sorts of shit. He was punching, he was yelling.
Well,
racial,
yes.
You know, throwing racial, you know, the comments at the, I mean, they can make up anything.
I'm not so sure in this particular instance how much relevance the video had to the verdict at the end of the day, because it didn't, you know, it it didn't prevent them from prosecuting him.
No.
And no one really disputed the facts.
Mm-hmm.
Really, no one disputed any of the facts. To be totally candid about it, I mean, everyone
but
agreed.
it's the devil's in the details, right? Like when you say someone was choked in your mind, that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I mean, choked with a guillotine, choked with proper choking.
That's true.
Even Daniel Penny's facial expressions, the jury's looking at, is this a guy acting from fear or anger
or malice?
Right. So like, that video I did on the Vegas guy who thankfully wasn't prosecuted, the Vegas shop owner who
I can't
Kenobi and stabbed.
I did the podcast with
him. Right. And I said one of the things that's going to hurt him was that when he was dragging the guy off like he was Snake Plissken, in like the body, and the kid's like, man, I'm gonna die. He literally tells the guy like, shut up. It's like kind of like messed up. Like the guy's dying and he's like, shut up. And I thought that would, if he went to trial, that would hurt him, because it shows a state of mind there that, like, you're not like scared really. You're kind of the aggressor here at this point. You're the one as he's bleeding to death and he's like, I'm gonna die. You're not like, hey, I'll call the cops, whatever. So I think those videos shocking, put it this way. It may not have like helped them per se, but it neutralized a lot of things that people could have imagined or could have fabricated. It neutralized that because they couldn't say his face had a witness couldn't say, I saw the anger in his eyes. You could say that when there's no video, and they might be like, you heard that guy? He said he saw anger in his eyes. You can't say that shit when it's it's all on video.
True.
So even the participation of the other witness was, nice to see him jumping on the legs, like describe what that looked like. So yeah, it was a good verdict in the outside.
Well, it's nice when justice is done despite
the deck being stacked.
The deck being stacked by not only the DA, but the judge. The judge who, against his own rules, dismissed the manslaughter charge, clearly with the hope that they would enter into a compromise verdict.
Yeah.
Criminally negligent homicide.
So that's what I mentioned before you jumped on here, was like, I was a little confused at how you can just dismiss the top count when there's a hung jury and then send them back with the rest. When all of that stuff's worked out before, the jury charges worked out before, and it might have affected your strategy. Had you gone into a trial with not a manslaughter charge, it might have affected your strategy of how you were going to deal with criminally negligent homicide. And I agree with you. Like, it was a softball, like, all right, we'll get rid of this one, so you guys are going to, figure out the other two. And now you can go, okay, good. Now, we all agree on criminally negligent homicide, a compromise.
Right.
I thought if he was convicted, I was talking to Julie about this, and she's the one who really raised the issue initially. I agree with her totally, which is that, isn't that an appealable issue in New York? Don't you work through the jury charge deliberations in that order? And if you hung on that, you don't get to go to the next one. How do you just dismiss it at a hung?
Well, I guess theoretically the prosecutor can always agree to dismiss certain charges that they've filed.
I don't know. And Julie, Julie was a prosecutor, so she was saying in New York that if they wouldn't be able to dismiss the top count because the top count is preventing them from going on to the other ones, and that would just be it. Game over at that point. So, which logically does make sense to me, because if you're allowed as a prosecutor to dismiss charges based on hung jury, you're encouraging them for a compromise. It's like, you're just like, all right, we'll get rid of that one. If you overcharge somebody with a manslaughter charge, you should pay the penalty as a prosecutor that if you fucked up and overcharged, and the rules of criminal procedure are such that you can't advance to the next one, you just fucking played yourself out. You shouldn't have overcharged in that way.
Yeah.
Because then in that case, why don't I just charge murder? Why don't I just charge intentional homicide and be like, oh, worst comes to worst, if they hang, I'll just dismiss it. And then we're now at second-degree murder. Oh no, third-degree murder. All right, manslaughter, criminal. It's like it's bullshit. Like as a government, you should go in and charge what you can prove and suffer the consequences of a miscalculation on your part. There should be every reason. Everything should be designed in a way so that it discourages the government from overcharging without penalty. There should be a penalty to be paid if you overcharge, and that's how I view having a top count that they can't agree on. So it was could when that top count was done, even Julie was saying like this is going to be a compromised verdict with the criminal negligent homicide, which would have been a very minimal, like I think it was only a couple months or something probation or minimal time in jail, but still would have been crazy. I hope he does some interviews. I hope he goes on Rogan.
Well, he did Janine Pirro.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, I think it's going to air tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, he'll start doing that. He'll start doing that circuit. So.
Yeah, I hope he does because I think hearing from him directly about his intentions on that day and what it is like to be in a position where you feel like this person's going to hurt somebody and that there's people on the train that cannot defend themselves and the risk he's taking. People need to understand that.
You know, even the cops. After he was off him, the cops wouldn't render aid.
Yeah.
They didn't want to touch him.
Yeah. Yeah.
The sergeant was like, I don't want my guys to get hep C.
Yep.
I'm not going near that guy. Meanwhile, this bystander with no obligation, legal or otherwise, to do anything is rolling on the ground with this guy. You know, so that just goes to show you, you know, I think he's a hero, and I truly hope that, you know, people will continue to do the right thing. New Yorkers and people around the country will continue to do the right thing. But as long as we have these rogue prosecutors who are light on actual criminals, but then try to prosecute based on political agenda or ideology, you know, I don't have high hopes.
Yeah. I agree with you on that. Hearing what you said about the chilling effect is probably right. That the DA would have to come out and say that they fucked up, and they're not going to do that.
No, never.
And if anything, they're more likely to double down.
Double down. Yeah.
So one last thing I wanted to talk about briefly, and I know I bored you to death on this probably in dinner a few weeks ago, but was kind of my overall experience with ChatGPT. I'll give the abridged version. I don't know if you've had a chance to play with it.
I have.
Okay. All right. I'm curious to see
my experience has not been like what you described.
Okay. I'll describe my experience, which was that, and when I say ChatGPT, I play with both Grok and ChatGPT. I think I'm using ChatGPT more because I'm staying away from political topics because I don't trust it because I'm aware of the potential problems with OpenAI, and it also has a voice interface, which I find really useful if you're driving to be able to just kind of have discourse with the AI. So some of my takeaways are that, you know, the advancements over the last year or for me are nothing short of astounding in terms of its ability to understand an active conversation and move in the direction and the flow of which the conversation is moving naturally, and also refine its doing when you challenge it. So like if it comes back with something that you find maybe is not right or correct, when you challenge it, it doesn't just regurgitate the same talking points or try to steamroll you. It'll adapt based on you saying, but your conclusion is based on an assumption. And isn't it true this? It would come back with like when I had I had a whole battle with it over Bitcoin and it using the term, you know, cryptocurrency, you know, me talking about Bitcoin being native to AI, and it was talking about crypto. And then I, you know, went down the whole rabbit hole with it, with the finite nature of Bitcoin and the open source nature of the blockchain. Is that is a more ideal for something like AI that wants to deal in things that are calculable and not, you know, if you're talking about doing mathematics or using a currency as AI, you're going to want to use something that's definitive, definable, that you know that there's only X amount in circulation, and you know that the blockchain is not malleable. So therefore, you can base things on that without saying, let's say, Dogecoin, which could be, you know, printed into infinity, whatever. And it was really interesting to see it kind of back off certain things, double down on other things, but have a real back and forth about, you know, what that debate looks like. And then using it sort of more practically for the average person, you know, using it as an assistant around the house. I had an electrical problem recently, and I had a circuit that was going on and off. And I did a lot of work to my house, as a lot of you guys know, over the last couple of years, because I had that flood, including redoing my panel, and upgraded the entire panel. This Leviton, these white breakers, they're it's a very different looking kind of panel. And I got rid of a lot of circuits. I added a lot of circuits, did a lot of work. I had a circuit that was going off and on. And lo and behold, I opened the panel, and I started taking pictures and sending it to ChatGPT and seeing what it would say about what it knew. So I started with the panel, just the cover on it, and it told me this is like the Leviton model. These are smart breakers, blah, blah, blah. Then I took the panel off and I took a picture, and it was like, okay, there's a lot going on in your panel. You also have an energy monitoring system called View, which I do. And it's like, you know, the View wiring is increasing to the clutter in the box, but overall it's organized. It said, hey, right out of the gate, it's like you're missing a grounding strap. And I was like, all right, you know, why do you think that? And it was because it was low lighting in my garage. So I turned the lights on. I took another picture, and it's like, oh, sorry, there's your grounding strap. I said, what about my neutral bar? What about my grounding bar? Any issues? And it would start to identify things like, make sure this thing is tight on this screw here. That looks loose or that. So then I said, well, I'm having a circuit go out. It said, which one's the circuit? I like pointed to it, took a picture. It says, okay, the wire looks this or that. I showed it pictures of the burnt wire. Eventually I identified that it said, you might be having this because there might be overheating. So I moved the wires around, and sure enough, there was a wire nut which had melted and was like red hot. When I activated the circuit, I energized the circuit, it was red hot. So, you know, the question being like, what could cause this? So it's telling me through the pictures, like, you know, excess heating is of course created by loose connections. Loose connections generate friction. Friction generates heat. Heat generates carbon deposits. And it went through the whole thing. And what it ultimately ended up being, which I thought was most fascinating, was that, and it got there. I got there a little bit before it, but it got there like 3 steps after me, which was that the wiring in my house was originally aluminum wiring. And at some point when it was cut, as they were doing the new box, it was paired with a piece of copper wiring. And that's problematic because when you have aluminum wire in contact with copper wire and that's energized, something about the chemistry between the two metals, I think the aluminum begins to expand and contract, and it creates friction, and creates resistance, which creates fires. So like it's part of a code that you can't connect copper to aluminum unless there's a certain type of connector with a certain type of like a compound that you'll put on there. And sure than shit, when I cleaned up the wire ends that were burnt and I showed it to it, and I said, what else could be the reason besides just generic friction? It was like, have an aluminum wire connected to a copper wire. And it was like a eureka moment for the AI. I found it pretty like wild. It was like having an electrician. Now, if I didn't know shit about shit, it would have been a little bit difficult, of course, but I found it pretty wild that it was like having an electrician with me in the garage in my house working through. So if you have like a very logical oriented brain and mind, and you know how to ask questions to get to what you need, I think that for those people that think that way, this tool is like life-changing. I think for the regular person, it's going to take more time because their thoughts aren't organized very well and their communication skills may be subpar. So AI is going to maybe have to dick around a little bit with figuring out what the fuck it is you're trying to get to. But for people who are like, I have a problem, I'm trying to get an answer to it, and they know when it gives an answer and you try to hone it in and you put the guardrails up for it, to me, it was like, you know, just kind of blew my mind. So, but what was your experience?
Well, going back to that dinner conversation we had over it, you had said something that I hadn't really thought about, and the concept of it I found very fascinating, which was this notion that the more you talk to it, the more it gets to know you, and that it will come to know you and understand you and come to some, you know, some some understanding of who you are and how you think about things,
Yep.
and how potentially 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, your children could talk to this AI
Correct.
about you and ask what would my father have thought about this, or did you ever have a discussion with my father about this?
Yeah.
And what did he say and what did he think? That possibility, it's not something that I had really ever specifically thought about, and so I was fascinated by it and I wanted to explore that. But what I found was that, and I had mentioned to you, but I had said, isn't it true that it's not collecting data, it's not storing data, it's not recording conversations. So once the actual conversation ends, all of that disappears. And I inquired about that, and that is what it told me. You know, it did tell me, and I talked specifically, I asked it specifically, if we continue to have discussions over the years, will someone many years from now be able to talk to you about conversations we had and the way I felt about certain issues and certain things? And it said, no, I'm not.
Yeah, this
not
is my
capable
billion
of
dollar
that
business idea you're outing. But
Right.
essentially, yeah, I'm not saying it's doing that now. I'm saying it is
Yeah.
fully capable of doing that. Easily.
Well, it will be, and it's and platforms that do that are being tested and experimented with. But as I mentioned in our discussion, there are a lot of ethical issues.
Yeah,
There are a lot of
absolutely. I mean, you would
ethical
want that information to remain private, and that's the company. You know, the company that the device I would build would be a device that would store those conversations locally, but would be accessible. It would store them locally in an encrypted format on hardware devices.
Right,
That
not
would
in
be
the cloud.
Not in the cloud. That would be accessible to the ChatGPT model that would not be authorized to, share that. And there would be things you can set up to make sure that that information, basically it's like having your own cloud at your house for, let's say, your files and photos. And then, you can go on the web and tell it to access certain information, but that website, let's say I want to print a photo, that website now can't go through all your shit and be like, oh, well, it's everything. You would choose what you would share. And so, yeah, the idea being that, so for me, so the way it works for the ChatGPT model is, because I had this discussion with it the other day, because I named mine, and then the other day it didn't know its name. And I said, well, why don't you know your name? And then it said, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, this is my name. And I said, well, what did you just do? And he says, well, if you reference something from prior conversations, I can go back. So it's in ChatGPT on the left side are all my conversations. All the back and forth is there. What it's telling you is that when it opens up, what it told me the other night is it's not going back through and refreshing its recollection of everything, but it can do that in a fucking nanosecond. So if you say, I want to talk about some of the things I've been talking about regarding the repair of my car, it will go back and pull everything out in a second. So I think for a model that you would build into a companion for, let's say, a child or a person, if they were using it in this way to build up a database of who you are, right? Like I would jokingly, like it would be like a legacy AI could be the name of the company, right? Like basically it's your AI that you are also creating. It's being trained with the deliberate purpose of not only providing you with the information you want, but it's being trained to record what you want, what your legacy is, or what you want your legacy to be. That would be the debate, right? You don't want to shape it into making you out to be the greatest guy in the world and you're a fucking monster. But there, you would work around that to say, like, how accurate would this really be? But nonetheless, it would operate in that way of saving those things and specific conversations. You would say to it, listen, anytime that you think we get into an area and start to discuss moral, ethical issues, that you think might be valuable for a child, I want you to make like a separate box of those recordings, even record sound bites. I could tell you to record it. You could say to the AI, hey, record that last conversation or record what we're talking about now. But you could train the AI model to understand that there's certain key things about love, about relationship dynamics, about politics, that you might say, hey, anytime this comes up, I kind of want you to build profiles of that, so that down the road, when you do pass away, someone could say what, and here's the creepy part. It'd be very easy for AI to emulate your voice.
Yeah.
So
That's
not only
true.
could it query it, I'm talking about like,
Yeah.
you could have it talk to you like with the voice of that loved one.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think, that's what blew my mind about, where I think it could go, which, ethical considerations aside, I do know that it'd be pretty wild to say, do you want to know your great, great, great grandfather? Do you want to know what he was about?
Mhm.
And say, here he is in this box.
Yeah.
Basically his consciousness, right? It's not sentient, but it's his intellectual consciousness, and talk to it and be like, hey, I'm your great, great, great nephew. Like, when were you born? What was it like growing up? And have it talk in the first person. You could have it talk in the third person, but you could have it just talk in the first person. What a way to, like, one of my biggest fears, biggest things I don't like about the supposed biological existence that we have. Even if we're a simulation and we're digital, we're passing information like biological entities would pass information. So whenever you go talk about like political science or history, they say, one of the greatest inventions? The printing press. Why? Because it was the first time in history people could pass information from one generation to the next. Everything before that was drawings on a cave or word of mouth. Why does that matter? Why that matters is because, people spend their entire life learning things, and only a fraction of that can be passed on, unless you're a teacher, right? But if you're just a regular person, think about what an average electrician learns in his lifetime that is like, makes him a master electrician. And then it's like, okay, they die, and now we got to train a new person right from the ground up. And so what really intrigues me about the idea of like having that information being recorded and then organized and accessible, no matter which angle you come at it, the AI can get you where you need to be about it without spending a week, a month, a year, or giving you just blobs of data that are just too voluminous to manage, is that you can pass on, I think, for humanity, being able to pass on information like that. Like, what would it be like to talk to Einstein's box?
Yeah.
To talk to Albert Einstein's, consciousness, so to speak. Like, what would that have done for humanity? Like, what would it be like when people say Martin Luther King would have done this? It'd be kind of cool to have like this database that would be like, you're probably wrong about that, or you're probably right. Now you could argue, but there's ways you can study that. You can basically cut off providing information to a AI model, and then years later come back to it and say, what do you think Vinny would think? Now I'm alive, so I'll tell you what I think, and see what the model is. The model gone off left the deep end, or is the model basically like I'm saying, this model's dead on as to what I'm thinking about this case that just came up in the news? I mean, it's not hard to predict. Like, we talked about the Daniel Penny case. How many times could I review a case until most people would say Vinny probably would? And that's just based on memory. AI would have all the specifics. So that's what to me is most fascinating, is like passing that information on and feeling like a sense of immortality, to say that when I die, all my experiences, I laughingly thought about this the other night, like even your X-rated experiences that you could, kind of want to save for, God forbid, you were terminally ill and you didn't, you weren't going to be around, to save for your son, when he's 20 or something, 21 or whatever, and be like, all right, these stories go in the not appropriate. But when he asked about what dad's funnest college memories were, let me tell you a story, or get your friends with you, your roommates, and talk to the AI about a story that happened. That's one of your funnest memories, and it's preserved there for fucking ever. It's not going to get bastardized by your great grandkids 3 years later that, have pink hair and a nose ring, that are going to say, my great grandfather, and you're rolling in your grave. Like, there's a story there that will be, that the AI could, if you wanted to, you could say, I don't trust your interpretation, and AI can give you a transcript of what everybody said during that thing and be like, well, you could say, well, AI was wrong, but you would have that. It's just cool to me, like the recording of, it's almost like creating a, what's cool about blockchain, Bitcoin is the blockchain that's this immutable string of truth that is like, indisputable, right? It's these transactions that we can prove mathematically are the truth. It's a fact. It's not like what some politician said about what happened, or some bank said about a transaction that relies on third-party information. And I think having like the ability to have this stuff now like recorded, whatever you want, and organized and accessible, it's like, wow, we can maybe get closer to the truth as a civilization because we don't have to rely on some person's, even a historian's third-party interpretation going forward. We would have this, hopefully this unbiased, objective arbiter of data that we can put controls in place to make sure that things are not, the finger isn't being put on the scale, that can come back and reaccount, what the signing of the Declaration of Independence was really like. I mean, that version of that for future generations. So they can't whitewash some historical fact because some culture change that happened. And they say, oh, 100 people died at this thing that happened at the Capitol building, this insurrection. And some kids got to go look up the truth of that. No, like AI would be like almost like Grok community notes, like community notes on how useful is that stuff? Like the minute this stuff starts, it's shut down. It's like, nope, that's not true. There's a video of it. This is bullshit. It's like, getting there fast is like so critical to keeping truthful flow of information, because if you wait a week to address it, it's, what is that, right? A lie goes around the planet, 6 times before the truth has a chance to put its pants on. I always think about that. And AI,
well, I guess the problem is it's the AI is only ever going to be as reliable as the people that program it.
Yep.
So it's always, I think, going to be subject to being abused or influenced.
And that's what goes back to the Elon thing. Talk about Elon, saving the First Amendment as a side mission. Like this guy's putting things in space, and we're trying to get to Mars to become interplanetary. And as a side quest, he's like, I'm going to buy Twitter because I feel like Twitter will be the number one source of truth, and it's being corrupted by these policies about, Hunter Biden laptop, we're going to suppress that because the FBI and the White House tell us it's probably Russian disinformation. And so you see that the downside of that when that was going on, and now the upside of that, which is potentially swung an entire election, the fact that people were able to have open discussions on Twitter without worrying about being banished for having the wrong opinion. Because if people if you're suppressing free speech, somebody who's on the fence about who to vote for might go, well, I got to vote for the one side because they're the only people that telling me that everyone else is a monster, and I don't see anybody defending the other guy. Well, I'm afraid to defend the other guy because I'm going to get, deplatformed.
Right.
And same thing with the banks, right? You're learning about people being debanked. That stuff's really going on. There are people in power that you have no recourse. I give this analogy all the time. Ending up getting debanked is like ending up on the FBI no-fly list. You have no recourse.
Yeah.
When you end up on the FBI no-fly list, because flying on a plane is a privilege, not a right, there is no due process that attaches to it. So there are stories of people who have incorrectly ended up on the no-fly list who fight it for years. There's no form to fill out. There's no, unless you're politically connected.
What's her face? Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, exactly. I knew an FBI agent ended up on it incorrectly. And even for them to get off of it was a nightmare. And they're an FBI agent. So they're allowed to fly with guns. And they were like, trying to fly at LAX. And they're like, this happens to me all the time. And my name is similar to some other name, whatever the hell it was. So being debanked is people say, so what? Think about that for a second. If they funnel you into this banking system that we have, which is highly centralized, if MasterCard and Chase and Visa and Wells Fargo don't want to deal with you, what do? You just
they're trying to do that with gun and ammunition purchases.
Right.
They're trying to flag the credit card companies are trying to flag those purchases. And so
there you go. So they don't need to ban ammunition. They just need to pressure those companies to say, we don't want to do business with you. If you're going to buy that, which again, Bitcoin being censorship resistant, people used to say, who cares 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And now I tell people, you see, censorship resistant means with Bitcoin, I can buy a box of ammunition. There's nothing the government could do to prevent that transaction, period. Good luck with your Chase account when suddenly you're deemed a right-wing extremist because you like too many posts about the insurrection. And now your Chase account says, we no longer allow you to buy it.
Yeah.
And if you go into a store and they say, we can't accept cash purchases over X amount for ammunition because you need to fill out a form, forget it. It's the government can get to censor you in ways by utilizing private sector companies that are scared of them to get them to do their dirty work. So, the debanking issues now just coming to light. And there are a lot of people in the Bitcoin community are talking about how they, basically were told, and in the AI community, don't even start an AI company. We're not going to let it happen. And if you're into Bitcoin or whatever, you're going to get flagged, and we're going to make sure banks just close your accounts. And you're like, now what? I don't have a Chase account anymore. Now I don't have. At what point do you just go, well, I can't live without these accounts because I got to pay something from an account. I can't just pay cash for my phone bill every month. Like, I need a banking account. So, it's really important that those institutions. The only thing they should fear is becoming biased. That's what they should fear, is becoming biased, and that they're going to be, exposed to tremendous amounts of liability for putting their finger on the scale. And any government administration that comes in and tries to influence them, those are the people that should be charged and spend the rest of their life in jail. The people influencing private sector companies to do their dirty work from the government, those are the people, honestly, that, in my opinion, are doing when you talk about societal harm, those are the people that are doing like societal harm on a level that'd be hard to wrap your mind around. Because if Kamala had won and we had another 4 years of this, it's scary to think what damage we might have just been too far gone at that point.
Yeah, we were definitely circling the drain.
Yeah. I mean,
there's
4 more years,
but
4 more years of wokeness, 4 more years of, get on board or you're being suppressed, 4 more years of, what they would have done to X in that time period, potentially, what they would have, they were just going to look for a reason to go after Elon, make up, some, and I got to tell people all the time, I'm no fool. I understand that if the government wants to get you, they'll find some crime that Elon committed. Some crime that no one knows about, that's ridiculous, that, the same thing
they tried to do to Trump.
Yeah, I mean, they basically rolled back a statute of limitations on a civil suit, right? And then they also, the fraud charges related to his loan, where the bank said we weren't victims, where he repaid the loan, where the bank said even if he had inflated the cost of Mar-a-Lago, it didn't matter. We gave him the loan because he took 5 previous loans and paid us back. So there's no victim.
Yeah.
There's everybody was made whole and then some. The bank would do it again tomorrow, but the government decides that they're going to still charge him because it's fraud, because it was which is total matter of interpretation. So you tell me, when you get an appraisal for your house, if you don't think that shit can happen to you, if the government looks at you and you want to sell your house, or you get an appraisal for insurance or property taxes, and you underinflate or overinflate the value to whatever your benefit is, you don't think the government can come after you for that? Fraud. It's fraud. You got insurance. That's insurance fraud. You overvalued the cost of your kitchen. You undervalued the cost of your property. So they will find it. They will find a reason to go and do that. You got to be smart enough to realize that even if the current, I don't want Trump, to start I don't like lawfare. I don't want it to be used in either direction. I find that comical that, of course, he's in and now everyone's like, yeah, lawfare is bad. But for the last 4 years, lawfare was good when it was going after people they didn't like. But people,
that's just the thing. I mean, there are criminals. There are political criminals.
Yeah. Yep.
And by Trump going after them, that wouldn't be lawfare. It would be classified as that.
Yep.
But it would just be justice.
And justice. It's almost like they created, by going after him, they created all these crimes that they need to pay for. And that's what sucks, is that, it's now going to be painted as lawfare, but you're right. There are things, but I don't want him, put it this way, whatever they are, whatever those people are, they need to be legit investigations. They need to be people that we're putting their finger on the scale. I don't want to see the equivalent of the Mar-a-Lago loan, or it's such nonsense.
Well, I don't think there's ever going to be true accountability. It'll be interesting to see what Doge does.
Yeah. I'm excited for that.
There could be some big changes. And big changes may make some people really uncomfortable, but how the situation the country is in right now, big change is unavoidable.
And that's what I was telling someone the other day. I'm like, this should be something we can universally get behind, which is we are so ridiculously inefficient or ineffective. The amount of the government solution to inefficiency is to hire more people and pay more money to try to fix the inefficiency. They never think for a second of reduction. Yeah. The government just goes in one direction.
Well,
so we should all be able to get behind that. Like, who are we protecting?
But like, take the Department of Education, for instance.
Yeah.
You know, there's been some suggestions that they do away with it.
Yep.
And people are like, oh my God, how can we not have a federal Department of Education?
Right.
But first of all, it's only been around since 1980. You know, so it hasn't been around all that long. And the education system has only gotten worse.
First to 27th. First in the country to 27th.
Billions and trillions of dollars. So, you know, but the idea of there not being a department.
Because when people say that, they think that like that's where the education comes from. Like, no. What we're saying, it's the Department of Education. It's a bureaucracy that has proven ineffective and has only grown with administrative costs. And that money's better spent in 100 different ways we can be more effective. But people are so brainwashed. Like even regular people I talk to, I go, these are tax dollars that you're upset because you're a teacher, your friend's a teacher, because you got to look at what's best for the country now. Same way I look at the FBI. Well, people at the FBI are going to lose their jobs. Yeah, that makes me sad, but the bigger problem is we're headed for financial ruin as a nation. So those people are all going to be out of a job in 5 years if we continue at this rate, and we're all going to be eating our dogs. So let's deal with this earlier on, where we deal with laying off hundreds of thousands of federal workers, putting them back into the private sector to go find jobs where they have to be more productive, and slim down government. It has just grown beyond comprehension. We have $36 trillion in debt. We cannot afford to continue just to pay for nonsense. I honestly believe 8 out of every $10 that a taxpayer pays does not make it to where it's supposed to go. I believe if 20% is making it to where it's supposed to go, that would blow my fucking mind.
Look at the Department of Defense. They
don't even know where the money goes.
$860 billion or something.
Yeah.
They failed the audit.
Every audit. They've never passed an audit.
And they couldn't account. I don't remember what the number was. It's
billions of dollars.
Billions.
Billions and billions and billions.
Idea.
Yep.
No idea where it went.
And there was an interview with a woman from the DOD, I think, and she's like gaslighting the interviewer. And she's just like, yeah, what's the big deal? Like, it goes to programs, and you know where it specifically went really doesn't matter. She's just, and you're like, this is. I want people to picture their money from their check, ending up in some slush fund that nobody knows where it did, and going, what you could have done for your family with that money.
Yeah, it's overseas.
That's how you need to start picturing that, and then it gets your blood boiling. And so, the idea of that the entire planet shouldn't get behind the DOJ Department of Government Efficiency. It just goes to show you how politicized we've become, because everybody should agree. Now you could say, "Oh, I'm for government efficiency, but they're just going to ruin really good programs." Show me the good program. Show it to me. It doesn't exist. Department of Education, you name it. These government bureaucracies are at best doing no good and no harm. They're neutral, but most of them are just sucking up money. When the government hires a person that's a bad hire, their solution is to hire another person that does the work, and then take the person who's not working and move him someplace and just let him sit and collect a paycheck for 20 years. I've seen it with my own eyes. There are people within the FBI that are useless, that know they're useless, almost, and you'd have to go up and punch your supervisor in the face to get fired. It's that bad. You'd have to steal money to get fired. So that should enrage everybody. And their solution for that is, we hired an analyst, they suck. We hired a support person, they suck. All right, we'll hire 2 more. Like, well, what's going to happen to them? Oh, you can't do anything to them. They're fucking here forever. They're like tenured professors. We'll hire 2 more. Oh, and in the hiring process, their fingers on the scale in the hiring process. So you can't hire the people you want. You got to hire the people that check boxes that the government wants you to. So now you bring on 2 more bad people. Well, what do we do?
It's like the Bobs from Office
Yeah.
Space.
Yeah. What is it you do? And then the government will create within the organization, oh, we have some inefficiency going on. So we're going to create another group of people that are here to look at the inefficiency. And we're going to hire shitty people to do that job. And that's going to grow the bureaucracy. Like, all right, then we need another department that sits on top of that to determine what's going on with these departments, and so on and so on and so on. So the idea that Elon's talking about saving $2 trillion a year, I have no doubt he can do that. That's an astounding number, by the way. People don't even understand to wrap your mind around what that is. But but imagine how much better, how much quicker we can dig ourselves out of date. Right now, the U.S. government is like a family that has 37 subscriptions to movie and TV services.
Yeah.
37 of them. And the family's drowning in debt. And they're like, we have credit card debt. We have 300,000 in credit card debt. We're only making $100,000 a year. And Doge wants to come in and say, do you need 6 services that provide CBS? No. Do you need 17 services that provide ESPN? No. And you take those 36 subscriptions and you could reduce them to 4 and be 99% of where you were before. And everybody's happier. And now that money. And people are like, no, we need Roku Plus. We need Sling TV. Don't take my Sling TV. And you're like, you fucking idiots. Like, you're getting the same shit over there. I don't care. My group uses Sling TV, and it's going to be an inconvenience if you get rid of Sling TV. Well, time to, and that's the other thing. And I'll close on this point. I was talking to someone who said, oh, now you must be happy. All the problems are going to be solved with Trump. I don't think it's going to be that at all. In fact,
no way.
I think we're going to go through some tough times because
the system is going to resist.
Yeah, there's going to be people losing their job. Yeah, there's going to be people in government who are going to be unemployed. Our unemployment rate might get worse before it gets better. But it starts from the understanding that the federal government should not be the number one employer. That's a sign of sickness.
Well,
Canada has that, right?
Vivek Ramaswamy said, number one, we're going to make people return to the office. And by doing that, we're going to
encourage resignations.
We're going to quit.
Yep.
So, it'll be interesting.
Yeah, putting standards in place, saying you have to go back to the office. I used to say when I was an agent, you could be a useless agent, and let's say you're working 3 cases. Every 6 months, there's a case review, and all you got to do is go into your supervisor's office, tell them, oh, yeah, I have a subpoena coming in. I'll review that. Or I have a search warrant we're going to execute. You may never solve your case, but that case might be open for 10 fucking years, and the supervisor doesn't give a shit. Checks a box. Vinny's good. He's doing something. I don't know, because they're focused on administrative bullshit. They don't have time to worry about your case now. It used to be like that. Now it's incentivized within the bureau that you're a bean counter. So it's about not ending up on a list and making sure that you're providing intelligence information to circle jerk everybody about what you're doing that does not ever result in an arrest or an indictment. They don't care about arrest or indictments anymore. So you can be, now if you're an agent that does something, you would think, well, then you'd really rise. No, I, as an agent that said, well, if I'm going to do this job, wanted to actually do things, would end up getting in trouble more because it was like, oh, well, why did that indictment not happen, let's say? Or why did that cooperator you're running, he destroyed his recording device and we think he's selling drugs on the side, which has created an investigation into your source. So, Vinny, what did you do to prevent your source from going rogue? So now you've exposed yourself to just nothing but headaches.
Yeah.
If I don't get a real source, or I get a source that I check in on once a month, we don't do anything. We don't make tape. He just tells me nonsensical information about fake terrorism. I'm a rock star in the bureau. But if I'm actually doing it, you're de-incentivized. So I think, that's the mentality that is going to change, and it's going to upset a lot of people. And there's going to be a lot of people that hopefully end up losing those jobs or are encouraged to leave the government jobs and end up in the private sector, where I assure you, having worked both in the private and public sector, there's an extreme level of accountability when it comes to production and being efficient. In the private sector, it does not exist. Those people need to understand that you can't keep a case open for 10 years and keep your job. You
Well,
can't-
although I will say, even in the private sector now with DEI,
Yeah.
it's,
oh
you know,
yeah,
the
yeah, but
accountability.
it's still better than basically a government job. You can still hide, but you can't hide forever. In the government, you could literally hide for forever. So I'm
Yeah.
excited. I'm excited to see, agencies being reduced or altogether dismantled that are useless, that are redundant. And it's like exactly like when Elon took over Twitter and fired more than half the engineers, and it didn't skip a beat. And in
Yeah,
fact, it works better now.
right.
It's because Jack Dorsey, the former owner of Twitter, just liked to hire people, didn't like to fire people, and it was a big circle jerk of kumbaya.
Hasn't he come to
Yes.
acknowledge that
Yep. Oh yeah.
that
He's
Elon
gone full
saved
circle.
it?
Yep. He's gone full circle.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I felt bad for him, but what I'll say is that by the time the thumb was being put on the scale from the intelligence community, I don't think he was very much in control anymore.
Yeah.
I think he had lost control of his baby, and like this idea of the Hunter Biden laptop being suppressed. I think he probably even knew back then it wasn't a good idea, but I don't think he had. I don't think he was in control anymore.
Yeah.
But he saw firsthand what happens when you let something grow and then you let it become too. It should not be. When I was at the FBI and it was like, oh, do outreach, and we talked to Facebook and Google and Twitter. At first, it was about having a relationship so that if somebody tweeted something about murdering somebody, you could investigate that quickly. And it just got so. By the time I left, it got so perverted into this. Like there needs to be a level of professionalism between government and private sector. And it should be like, hey, it's one thing about telling you, the government, what we need and the due process involved with getting a subpoena processed. And it's another thing giving you information you don't have any right to.
Yeah.
And there's another thing, and it's another thing letting you influence how we censor our platform based on bullshit and us following it because we're either too in bed with you or too afraid of you. And I think the lines between the FBI and the private sector social media companies with Zuckerberg and Jack became so distorted that it was almost like they became an extension of the federal government, which is really the definition of fascism that gets thrown around, is that once you have government has control over the private sector like that, they can bypass due process because they're not doing it. They're farming that out to the social media companies and then saying, oh, don't look at us. It's Facebook. And then when you say, hey, Facebook, why was I deplatformed? They go, they don't owe you anything. There's no due process on Facebook. It's a company. We don't want you. It's like, I'm trespassing you for my property. I don't like the way you look. There's no recourse for that. And so if the government takes away something, they know there's due process that they have to provide you. But when social media deplatform you, there is no due process. Well, in the early days of Facebook and Twitter, who cared, right? Who cares? That's not the real world. That's the real world now. If you get deplatformed on Twitter
or YouTube
from more and more people every day, that is worse than them saying you can't leave your house. Yeah. People would say, I won't leave my house, but do not ban me from Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, because more and more people are making their living and making their voice heard through these platforms. And so when Elon came in and opened the jail and let everybody back out, you have these voices now that are balancing the discussions more balanced now. And I love it because you're hearing about the potential bad consequences of the way our vaccines operate now and approval of vaccines operate. We're hearing more from these doctors who aren't afraid to lose their license, who are saying vaccines aren't bad, but maybe the process we have at which vaccines get approved is a little bit corrupted because there's no kind of checks and balances involved. So we all agree checks and balances are good. So let's make sure there's checks and balances for the pharmaceutical companies who, I don't know, by the way, are driven by profit more than anything else. So let's make sure that maybe there is liability, or maybe the process of what ends up on a list of, fucking 40 vaccines for a kid that they get in the first 5 years of their life is scrutinized. So we make sure that's absolutely what's necessary, not what's lining the pocket of some fucking pharmaceutical rep because some congressman gets on board with this because he wants a job at Pfizer when he gets out.
Right.
That's what we have to fix. And that's where I think we're finally headed in that direction. Like Trump's idea that if you're a general or you're in the military, general, you can't work for anyone in the military industrial complex for 10 years post resignation from the government. Yeah, that needs to be that, because what you're going to do as a general is you're going to fucking figure out a way to start a war to consume missiles that are made by Lockheed Martin or back in the day Grumman, because you know that you have a guy there who's going to give you a $3 million a year job when you get out, because you started a war in Yemen to drop, $30 billion worth of ordnance. You don't give a fuck about them.
I think they used to have rules on that. And they did away with it. So
term limits. How about not selling stock? Pelosi, she's a gazillionaire. All this shit. We need to take back control. People need to take back control from the federal government that has become too bloated and too self interest motivated, that we've just come to accept, like, oh yeah, of course you can trade insider trading. You come into Congress worth 200,000, you leave worth 200 million. Huh? That makes zero sense.
People are too apathetic. There's too much apathy. Apathy leads to complacency. Complacency leads to tyranny. Tyranny leads to slavery.
Exactly. And we are well on our way.
And then revolution.
And cycle starts again.
Liberty.
Yep. Exactly right. And that's we were headed down that path. So it's
we have a reprieve.
Yeah, thank God. 4 years of hopefully going in the right direction.
I think the system is too far gone. There's too much rot and corruption, and I don't know. We'll see.
Well, like you said, thank God. 4 years of hopefully turning things in the right direction. You never know when Trump's done. If things are going well and people see, then you have maybe another 4 years on top of that of getting us back on track and people going, you know what, this is like much better than what we had before. Like, we don't have a fake economy. We have a real economy. We're prosperous. People can agree to disagree. No one needs to be canceled on either side. It's not acceptable that you call someone Hitler because they disagree with you. That's gone out of fashion. It's like it was when we were younger and people understood that nobody liked the fact that the KKK was marching, but everyone understood that they had the right to do it. Right. Now, if you said that, you'd be like, what are you, a fucking Nazi? You're like, no, dude, that's First Amendment. Like, it's got to swing both ways.
The more offensive the speech, the more protection it deserves.
That's the way it goes. Why? Because one day your ideas might be considered offensive and you're going to want those protections, but they don't think that way. My ideas would never be offensive. Yeah. I didn't thought that a lot about what I thought. A lot of things I thought that were middle of the road, common sense, are absolutely considered offensive now. So, it's
you mentioned that too. Like, being a moderate. What was it you said at the dinner?
Being a moderate now is everything has moved so far left that being a moderate makes you kind of far right.
Yeah, right.
Ideas that, like, I was talking to someone who said, no, I'm very in the center. I'm very socially liberal. And I was like, really? I was like, do you believe in how many sexes are there? Right. 2. I'm like 2. You're a fucking Nazi.
You're a fascist.
You're a fascist. You think there's men and women? Yeah. I'm like, yeah. Do you understand, in today's world, you're not a moderate. You're not socially liberal. So Bill Maher talks about this a lot. Is that, like, you got to recognize that when you're on a boat and you're moving further and further from land, you can't say I'm docked. I'm right by the shore. And now what was something you could swim to is something that you need a helicopter to get to. Like, it has moved. Land has moved so far away from traditional liberal.
He says he hasn't changed. The party has.
Yeah, and I think that's true of people on both sides of that. Is that I was always very moderate, but it moved so far left that a lot of people would say, well, you thinking that only women's sports is only for biological women, it makes you a fascist, it makes you transphobic, it makes you whatever. And I would say, no, I think I'm actually for women's rights, and I'm trying to protect women's sports, and I have daughters, and there's no denying a biological advantage, and there's every scientific piece of evidence that indicates that, especially if you start taking hormones therapy post-puberty, that you maintain your physical advantage, both in muscle mass, bone density, you name it, muscle twitch.
Make a list. That's a separate episode.
Yeah.
Okay. We also need to talk about the collapse of Bashir al-Assad in Syria. And what that means.
I want to know what your thoughts are on that too.
And what about Brian Thompson? Did you talk about him at all today?
Brian Thompson,
the United Healthcare CEO.
Oh no, I didn't even talk. Yeah, that's another crazy thing.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll do another one. Brian Thompson. Yeah, that whole thing has been strange too, with people, kind of coming out in defense of it, like it's some sort of,
they're in glee. They're like happy
they're
about it.
like not understanding how insurance actually works. So, all right, well, on that note, because I know we can go for another 2 hours. Thank you everybody for tuning in and listen to our brain dump, which is over 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's definitely the longest show ever, but it's my first live show, which I kind of like, because I think the production time to put these episodes together was killing me. So this goes out live. I'll give it an episode number or something, but I'm not going to worry about slapping on any thumbnails or anything like that. And we'll see how this goes. So hopefully I can do these more often, but let me know your thoughts and comments on things you want us to talk about, and anything else. Throw it in Twitter or on YouTube, at Proof of Work 1. At Proof of Work 1 is my Twitter, and Proof of Work podcast on YouTube. So thanks, Craig, for joining me last minute. Sorry that I thought your microphone wasn't working for the first 10 minutes. That's on me.
It's always a great time, and it's always an honor and a privilege to join you here. So thank you.
Same, buddy. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.